Well, to discuss these matters a little further, I want to bring in now the Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan. Greg, welcome. You've got Albanese meeting with two world powers within a fortnight. There's this line that's been running a bit today that he perhaps ought not to go and focus on issues at home. What do you make of that?
No, I think it's right that he goes. I mean, you know, a Prime Minister meeting the President of the United States and the President of China, that's pretty central to his job description. My criticism is entirely different. I think he has no credibility in Washington because the Albanese government has decided to do nothing at all on defence. It has cut the expenditure that was going to be delivered under the Morrison government's forward estimates, and it has just released the most shockingly embarrassing Defence Department annual report, which showed that it didn't even spend $600 or $700 million of its allocated budget because all the programs are in such a state of paralysis. It won't make any decisions on the surface fleet until next year. That means 2 years into office before it makes a single decision. Now, Albanese in opposition said he was going to urgently fix a decade of neglect in Australian defence. I think he's right about the decade of neglect. The coalition government was hopeless on defence, never delivered anything, just delivered press releases. But Albanese has been worse, and he has no credibility in Washington because of that. And he has, you know, a compliant position with China because, Penny Wong has talked about how Australia is going to build deterrence. Well, we're not building deterrence at all. We're doing absolutely nothing at all in defence. And that's the way China likes it. It's not the way America likes it. So he'll get good photo ops in both places. But where's the beef, Jack?
Well, yeah, we'll get to China in a minute. I mean, we've seen stories recently out of Queensland where they're talking about defence bases where you can't even have people go to the toilet in quick succession because they don't have enough, facilities for them to be able to do so without them clogging up. I mean, seriously, this is what we're talking about in terms of the state of our Defence Force at the moment. And without that investment in such basic things as that, let alone the capabilities we need, with, as you say, Albanese having no credibility in the US, when he goes over there and talks to Biden and talks to their defence representatives, how seriously do they actually take him on AUKUS, particularly when we know that the left of his own party doesn't even want him to be part of it?
Well, I think he has a very big credibility problem. The US itself is already reconsidering AUKUS. Congress is having a look at this and saying, why on earth would you think these jokers could ever build a nuclear submarine, or that we would give one of our nuclear submarines out of our line of battle to the Australians, even if they pay a lot of money for it? Now, on the other hand, we are a very good ally of the US historically, and Americans treat their allies very well. Our geography is still very useful to the Americans, so our joint communications facilities and so on, and our long history of military, standing shoulder to shoulder. That's all very powerful. And Biden is a very schmoozy kind of politician. He'll give his centre-left buddy Albo some good photo ops and everything. But the prospect of the AUKUS legislation moving through Congress is very dim. The doubts about Australia having the capability to do anything is very dim. And honestly, Caleb, you make good points about the dunnies on the, defence bases. But I tell you, I have much more basic worry than that. We have the oldest surface fleet we've ever operated, and this government has not decided to build a single new boat. Under the current arrangements, we get our first new ship for the surface fleet, an undergunned and hopelessly compromised Hunter frigate 10 years from now. So this government's plans are to do nothing for 10 years. We've had a missile building project in operation for 4 years. It hasn't built a single missile. Not a blade of grass has been disturbed where a missile factory is going to go. We haven't applied to the Americans for intellectual property to build a single missile. Now, what is happening is Albanese has really inherited the playbook of Scott Morrison. He's using the fraudulent symbolism of AUKUS as an excuse for doing nothing at all on defence capability. The Americans will give him a bear hug, but they're not fools. They can see what we're not doing.
And the importance of all of this, of course, is the deterrence of China, as you mentioned before. Albanese is going off to China early next month. You know, the key agenda will be lifting wine tariffs, but we've still got tariffs on other things like lobster and some beef. But you see on Friday, as I mentioned before, this 4-month-old report gets wheeled out on a Friday afternoon very quietly, hoping it doesn't get picked up in the news cycle, saying, well, we're going to leave the port of Darwin in Chinese hands. You can't help feeling that this is Australia ceding ground to China to suck up to them and say, please, sir, can you take away our tariffs? You know, why would we keep such an important asset in the hands of China, and why did they sit on that report for 4 months before releasing it?
Well, I think you're asking unanswerable questions. I think those are very, very fair questions. So since the report was completed, but before it was released, the Chinese released Zheng Lei, who never should have been in prison, and they lifted some of their outrageous trade coercive restrictions on Australia. At the same time, Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, is at an American conference saying, in all of human history, we've never seen theft of intellectual property on the scale that the Chinese are doing. At the same time, the Chinese are ramming Philippines boats in Philippines waters in the South China Sea. Now, early on, the Albanese government spoke very frankly about China, and I applauded them for it. And it looked early on as though they were going to lead a real effort to get some firepower into the Australian Defence Force in the next 5 years. That was what the Defence Strategic Review was supposed to be all about. They said, we're doing it this way so we can move real fast. Now, since then, they've stopped criticising China publicly. China still has one of our citizens hostage. They had a report 4 months old which told them what the government wanted to hear, which is that they didn't have to disturb the Chinese-owned lease on the port of Darwin. And yet they didn't release that, but I'm sure the Chinese knew what the results of that report were. And it looks as though we have just become the psychological equivalent of the Afghan government. We just hope and pray that the Americans will always take care of our security, and that's about it. When you've said that, you've said everything. So Albo has inherited the traditional Australian playbook, which is we're great on symbolism, we're pretty feeble on substance, and he's not doing anything about it. And I tell you, it's a very bitter disappointment. And Richard Marles is already shaping up as one of the most unsuccessful and inconsequential defence ministers that we've seen in the last decade.
I agree, and it puts us in a pretty precarious position. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time as always.